All right, everybody, we're about ready to get started on the next talk with Kathy Mitchell and Jennifer Riggs. We're going to be talking about body cameras and police surveillance. Kathy?
Okay. Can everybody hear me? So I will start by saying I am not a lawyer. Woohoo! One non-lawyer in the room. I am an advocate for police accountability. So I'll be very upfront about that. I come from a particular perspective on the body camera issue. Jennifer is a lawyer. You want to introduce yourself real quick? And
sure.
Jennifer, lots of credentials.
Jennifer Riggs, just very briefly, I actually taught here as an adjunct. They don't let homegirls come back because I graduated from UT. They don't let you come back as full professor, but they had me as an adjunct for 10 years. I started focusing on administrative law and open government way back when I was in school. I am still doing that. I'm now in private practice, started with about 9 years at the Attorney General's office, and I've been practicing now for about 32 years. And there are still tough questions to answer under the Open Government Act. But I deal mostly with powers of government, limits on those powers, and what are the rights of individuals and businesses when they interact with government. So thanks for being here.
So, body cameras. I think everybody basically knows what that is, right? Police body cameras, these devices they wear that film them. So, body cameras is one of the few places in the world of policing where everybody seems to agree. Community groups support giving police body cameras because we have a record in the event of police misconduct. Police associations support it because they believe that it will give the public the officer's perspective on things that happen in the world. And actually, you'll hear a lot about this today, while body cameras are fairly new, the idea that police are videotaping and audio taping during things that happen in the world is not new. We have had dash cams for quite a long time, and you may or may not know it, but dash cams come with awesome audio technology, and often, even if you can't see anything where a dash cam is not pointed at an event, you can actually hear almost everything that happens. So, body cameras are new? Kind of. We are at a moment when the call for body cameras has become quite urgent. Body camera footage can, in fact, prove or disprove what an officer has said. And I'm going to show some videos today because, you may not be following some of these issues. Oops, wait, what happened? I'm sorry, my video went away. This is not a touch screen. Okay, enter? No?
I think you right-click on it.
Right-click on it.
Right-click on it.
Oh no, I really want to see this video.
Oh, here you go, up top. There you go.
Oh.
Right there. And it looks like it is may still be loading. There you go. You've got a red go button.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I tried to load these in advance, but this is not playing.
Maybe on YouTube directly.
So, I'm sorry, Alex. Can you help me here? Can you give me... Take it out of presentation mode?
And into the technology side of things.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay, well, I am so sorry. This will hopefully be a brief delay while Alex helps my videos.
And I apologize
work.
too. I could have brought my laptop and loaded it on mine. And there we go.
Apparently Alex knows this video. There it is.
You might get commercials, so
Well,
I do have questions in relation to my observation on the video
yeah.
and what is consistent with the policies and core values of the Balch Springs Police Department. We just left here, we reached out to the family. My heart just skipped beats. And from one father to another, I don't know I can't even express what they're going through.
To insinuate that there was some sort of bad acts on their part that caused an officer to shoot multiple rounds into a vehicle occupied by 5 teenagers. There will be no justification. We are declaring war on bad policing. This has happened far too often. We are tired of making the same rhetorical demands.
Well, I think we came into that video sort of halfway through, and I'm hoping that this isn't going to be a problem throughout this presentation, but the key issue here is that the officer initially said that the students were backing aggressively into the officers, and that is why he pulled out his shotgun and shot them through the back window. When the body camera video was viewed, it was clear that they weren't backing up at all, and in fact were driving slowly away from the officers, and there were no threat whatsoever. So this is the kind of this is a almost perfect case study. Information was released immediately that sounded like the people who were shot were in fact aggressively threatening the officers. That was not true. And the Balch Springs police chief immediately reversed that information and came forward with the families. So that is sort of what I would call the pure case of why we want officers to be wearing body cameras. Because unfortunately, sometimes they don't tell the truth. On the other hand, officers do want body cameras, many of them, because a body camera tells a very specific story. As we know from trying to create our own YouTube videos, the angle of the video is part of telling the story. And in this particular case, a body cam video tells the story from exactly where the officer is. It is literally almost the officer eye view on something that happened. And I want to, once again, if I have to just talk about these cases, I will, but it would be unfortunate. So, I don't know how much you remember of the Tamir Rice case. It was a very famous incident where a 12-year-old boy was playing with a toy gun in a park. A woman called 911 and reported that it was probably a toy gun. If you listen to the 911 audio, she seems pretty clear that this isn't a hugely dangerous situation, but he's annoying people as they walk by the park. So Tamir Rice was a kid, and whoops. Oh, I'm sorry. Once again. Well, I'm going to not run these videos, and we'll just remind you that in this particular case, the officers pulled up. You can kind of see in this picture the car, that is the police car pulling up to the park. The boy was standing right there next to the police car, and indeed he did have a toy gun. They got out of the car and they shot him within a second or two.
Did you try that?
Honestly, I don't know what to hit. I don't know how to make these videos run. And the other one I'd actually really like to show you because it's probably not a video that you've seen. The other video is something that was released by a police department after a shooting, and you really can kind of get a sense for that critical second when an officer thinks somebody might have a gun and they shoot them. And it's definitely from the officer's perspective. So we don't know how to run these videos, do we? No. Okay. Well,
Because I mean, they worked when you
I
sent
know.
me a copy of the PowerPoint, I
yeah.
used them.
I ran all these videos from this PowerPoint. Okay.
You may be,
okay.
yeah, you may
Right,
be
all right.
able to,
Hold on. So we're gonna go,
there you go, yeah, down there.
no,
Back up, yeah, you go,
escape,
see down here?
yeah.
Go down to slide 6 and try it that way. See where you're over here on the side?
Okay. I'd like to,
But do it from that side, from the toolbar there.
yeah, it's not bringing it up. Hold on. Maybe there is a different view. I want to view the whole slide, not. Any PowerPoint experts in the room? If I want to not be in presentation mode, but I just want to view the slide on the screen, because this screen is showing this screen. No? All right, slideshow. I'm going to try one more thing. If I hit this, I go back to current slide, view.
Maybe just finding it on YouTube again.
Oh. Oh, wait.
There you go.
Oh, I don't know what I
Okay.
did, but.
Well, it's because you're open, you've got your slides open on the left, so.
So you're literally following this guy as the other officer. You're the second officer right behind the man. So I show this video, I know it's a bit graphic, but there have been a number of cases, and you've seen many of them, where somebody pulls something out and an officer just immediately shoots them to death in most cases. Officers have an interest in all of us having a better understanding of why that happens. That doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean we can't have a public dialogue about it. But body cameras give them that opportunity to show you what it is that they see. Oops. So then we come to some questions about how we decide who's going to see what and when. So we can see that body camera footage can quickly correct false statements made by officers in critical events like the killing of children. We can see that seeing the officer's perspective, that man was flailing around with something, and it actually turned out to be another toy gun case. You'd be shocked how many people are carrying toy guns. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And so then it becomes a question of, do we get to see all the video? Do we get to see some of the video? Who gets to decide which of the video we get to see? And this is the most controversial part of the body camera debate. Okay. Let's see if oh, look. Ha! It's going to work again. So I want to show you one, and the next couple videos that I have lined up They're pretty short. We all know that the debate around body cameras has focused on critical incidents where police officers have shot somebody. The truth is, most of what body cameras capture is not police officers shooting somebody. It is often police officers doing things they probably shouldn't be doing. Oh, never mind. I'm going to be forced by Fox News to play this on YouTube. And we'll have to watch a commercial. Skip ad. All right. So you'll notice this part has no audio. Body cameras today actually record all the time. Here we go. The body camera was just turned on by the officer.
Oh, the audio was, yeah.
No, the body camera was.
Oh, okay.
The officer thought the body camera was off, but the body camera is actually on in a different mode, this particular product. So shocking, he turns the camera on and goes back and finds the drug evidence that he just put there. It was kind of hard to tell in the beginning because you kind of have to know what you're looking for, but when you see it, if you saw it again,
They're showing it, yeah,
yeah.
So you're saying that he thought it was off original?
Yes. So many of these products are actually on all the time. We'll get to that a little bit. Whoa, no, stop. So the camera's actually on all the time in a mode that I don't entirely understand. There's no audio. So what happens is when the officer turns it on, it backtracks and keeps 30 seconds prior to the moment the officer turned it on. Obviously, there are lots of reasons for this, one of them being the degree to which officers can control when the video is on and when it is off. And occasionally it comes up important that we saw those 30 seconds right before he turned it on. So that particular case presents a host of problems for city government. An officer who is caught on video planting evidence becomes a big, big problem because every case that that officer has ever testified in becomes something that defense attorneys can come back and overturn. So at that point, who decides who gets access to that video? Hang on a second. We're gonna do one more similar kind of not your usual case study. And then I'm gonna turn it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit about how cities are, what position cities are in when these things happen. So in this particular case, this man died. You don't see it on the video. He fell, hit his head, and ended up the city was sued over this. I don't know if you can read the words on the screen. This is an Austin case, by the way. This man called 911 and was still holding the cell phone with 911 on it. He said he was physically disabled, and if he got on the ground, he would never be able to get back up. And she tased him, and he went down like a tree. And he died a few days later of brain injury sustained when he hit his head on the concrete. Sorry. So,
The small print.
I want to turn this over now to Jennifer, because the legal framework for the release of the videos that you just saw basically already exists. We have had dash cam video a long time, and Texas has a lot of experience with this. Go ahead.
You start with the basic premise of, is a video public information? Is it information subject to disclosure? We have a statute in Texas. You may or may not be familiar with it, the Texas Public Information Act. It's been around since 1973. And it takes a while for the legislature to catch up with technology, but by and large, the definition of public information includes videotape, includes any media in which information is stored. There's still a debate about whether it includes computer programs in all instances, but if information is collected, assembled, or maintained by a governmental body, including law enforcement, municipalities, anything we think of as a traditional governmental body, and some non-traditional governmental bodies, it is subject to the Act. And then you have to ask, does it fall within one of the Act's exceptions? So pretty much everything's covered by the Act, unless it's an object. If you ask the police department, I'd like the marijuana that was seized, or I would like your cell phone, or I would like your computer. Those are objects. Those, by and large, are not subject to disclosure under the Act. They don't fall within the definition of public information. Computer programs arguably should be, because you look at the data dictionary, they tell you how the information is going to be manipulated. They tell you something about the program, but there is still a series of opinions that indicates that computer programs are like keys, therefore programs are not themselves subject to the Public Information Act. So we know that videotapes are subject to the Act. Then the question is there an exception that protects them? With respect to body cams, the typical exception that is raised is what is known as the law enforcement exception. And if you want to look at this, all you really have to do is go find the Texas Government Code. It's Chapter 552, and the exception for law enforcement is 552-108. And it allows law enforcement agencies to withhold information that would unduly interfere with law enforcement and crime prevention. You know, we talked about the situation in which the governmental body and the law enforcement agency and the officer might want to disclose a videotape because it exonerates him. It shows that in the urgency of the moment, he couldn't tell whether a gun was a toy gun. The suspect pulled something that could easily be a weapon out of his pocket or coat, and you don't have the benefit of hindsight when you're approaching a scene. So there are many instances in which a body cam will exonerate the officer, and the officers want the public to see that. But the problem is, if you reveal only the videos that exonerate an officer, by negative implication, if you've withheld a video, then boy, it must show something totally different. It must show something like the officer having planted evidence. And I'm willing to suspect that the officer probably didn't know about the technology that had the body cams on, or he knew that you could see it through a screen, but that it would that it had the capacity to preserve a certain amount of time prior to the time he turned it on. And often there's a good reason for that from a technological standpoint, because by the time you turn it on, you may already be, from the officer's perspective, you may already be in a dangerous situation. You may need to have that backed up 30 seconds. So I understand why the manufacturers put it in there, and that was probably by design to make sure that they didn't have it being turned on too late to help the situation. So from a city's perspective and from law enforcement's perspective, if you release anything, or if you release only those things that exonerate, you may have a problem, because then the public is going to have, the media in particular, is going to have the perspective that what you haven't released shows something wrong. And of course, if I'm representing a member of the media, or if I'm the media, the question I'm going to ask is, why wasn't this released? There may also be other reasons not to release a body cam video. For example, in a no-knock search of a residence, a suspect there may be a suspect in the house, but there may be a lot of other people in the house who are not suspects, who have privacy interests.
Perfect segue. Let's take a moment.
You got one, good.
Yes. So we're going to add a layer of complexity now. Body cameras are clearly like dash cams in many respects, except for this one. Nobody is driving a police car into your house. When an officer is wearing a body camera and you have called 911 and there may or may not be a suspect in the house and that body camera is on, they are filming in your house. And the truth is, when you call 911, you are a suspect. You may have done something yourself. Your house may have been robbed because you've been dealing drugs out of your house and the people came and took your illicit drugs and a bunch of money. And so that is the perspective that officers will often carry into those interactions. So that thing is on, but should it be?
And in many instances, they're family disturbances, and
Right.
those are some of the most dangerous situations for officers that officers respond to.
And then I want to take it to the next level, because this is a real thing. And I know that occasionally when we talk about things like cameras, it can all start to sound very, like we've all gotten our tin hats on. But Fresno, California has created a more or less total information awareness police force. And the way that they're doing that is they're taking cameras that they have downtown, like our Halo cameras. In fact, I think they might be Halo cameras. And they're also connecting up the video from their police officers' body cameras. And they have a system of bringing all of that video information together into an actual surveillance room where all of the information is available to law enforcement and they can just see it in real time. I don't think that that is exactly what we had in mind when we all said the community and police agree that that everybody should have body cameras. I don't think that we intended that to become, a total information awareness system. This has been quite controversial, but I know that Fresno has moved forward with it, and the technology is rapidly moving in this direction. So with that in mind, knowing that officers who enter your home wearing a camera may very well consider you to be one of the suspects in the crime that you're reporting, should you have the right to tell officers to turn the camera off? Right now, you don't in Texas, and we'll go through the statute a little bit in a minute. But Texas doesn't recognize individual privacy rights with respect to police in your home wearing a body camera. Police are allowed to hear your request. I hear you asking me to turn that camera off, and the police have the discretion to decide to turn the camera off. It's a little bit of a not exactly privacy-oriented way of doing things.
If you're in that situation, you might want to say, I am not consenting to a search.
Yes.
Because that's one of the other issues. When you call 911, are you waiving your privacy interest? Are you consenting to a search of your residence? they deem it to be consent. And so if you're not and you want the camera turned off, probably good to say, I'm not consenting to a search.
Kathy, does the camera have a red light on it so you know that it's on or off?
Yes, most of the brands do. Not all of them, but most of the big ones you can tell that it's on. And now that gets to the complicated area of public policy. So a number of groups around the country have started to recognize the complexities that are embedded in this great idea and have come forward with what I would call best practices. And they are things like limiting officer discretion to turn the camera on and off, limiting the degree to which officers handle their own video. Video can be streamed in real time to its storage device. It doesn't actually have to be handed over at the end of a shift, although in many cases that's what's happening now. Retention rules so that we know that video is being kept. A big controversy is that officers should not have access to the video before making a statement in the case of a critical incident. Video should be promptly given to the attorneys of arrested people. And video release will be overseen by some kind of independent body. That is a unique idea that doesn't fit well with Texas's way of doing things. And in fact, since lawmaking isn't really about best practices, lawmaking is the sausage mill in which a bunch of interested people get in a room and fight it out, and everybody gets a little bit and some get more than others. Texas's law, very specific to body cameras. So now what we've done is we've said dash cam video had an entire body of law around it that existed prior to. But we decided to write an entire law just for body cameras that gives officers considerable discretion to turn the camera on and off. It requires data retention for only 90 days, although most local jurisdictions are doing way more than that. It requires that officers have pre-statement access to all the body camera video related to an incident. So officers get to see all the evidence before they make their initial statement about what happened.
A recognition of how inaccurate sometimes eyewitness testimony can be.
Yes, or conversely, it could be that
A very good lobby on the part of the Law
yes,
Enforcement
that
Association.
law enforcement has a very powerful lobby. And because, you know, I think we all know that if we were being interviewed at the scene of a crime, we would not be provided all the evidence that law enforcement had prior to making our statement about what we may or may not have done. Like, this is not a thing. It is not a good investigative practice. But it is the practice for body camera videos. And finally, we have a very strange public information statute, and we'll talk more about that. Video will not be released in the case of a critical incident or anything where an officer might be held administratively culpable. That takes it down from everything from shootings all the way down to maybe the guy was caught on video changing his timesheet. Like, this becomes like a vast array of video. It will not be released at all unless release serves a law enforcement purpose. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to talk a little bit about this unique statute.
Well, it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. In 1701-655, anyone who has a body cam, any governmental entity that has either receives a grant for body cams or otherwise operates a body-worn camera program has to adopt the policy for the use of body-worn cameras. Now, one of the provisions that has to be in their policy is a guideline for public access through open records requests to recordings that are public information. Well, now that tells you absolutely nothing. It begs the question of whether something is public information. And so what has happened is that releasing the video has to serve a law enforcement purpose. Well, under the Open Records Act, you can only withhold information if it serves a law enforcement purpose. So ask yourselves, what is a good law enforcement purpose? CYA for the agency? Why isn't that is that a legitimate goal? There are a lot of lawsuits filed, civil rights lawsuits under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, excuse me, for illegal searches or for use of unusual force, undue force that rose to the level that it violated civil rights. Does it serve a law enforcement purpose to enable a city to withhold evidence until and unless they know whether they're going to be sued? I mean, after all, they're protecting the public dollar. They're protecting taxpayer funds. Is that a legitimate law enforcement purpose? We don't really have answers to a lot of these questions yet, but you can see the dilemma. Wait a minute, you can only withhold it if it serves a law enforcement purpose, i.e., we know that there's a conspiracy here. We know there are 5 perpetrators. We only got 2 of them, and on the video they mention names. We don't want to release the video because it would disclose those names, and the other suspects could cover their tracks, flee the jurisdiction, do all sorts of other things. So you can understand the very direct purpose for withholding certain videos taken on body cam. But what is the purpose, the law enforcement purpose? Now, we personally think, I share Kathy's view, that it is a law enforcement purpose to restore trust in our law enforcement. And that is a significant, to obtain public cooperation and to instill trust in our law enforcement officers. But there are many other questions. I mean, we've listed only a few of them. Is it serve a law enforcement purpose to let the law enforcement officer himself clear his good name? Why not? I mean, they put their life on the line for us. Why not allow them? Shouldn't they have a say in disclosure? Is that a law enforcement purpose? Or is that just a personal interest? I want to keep my job. I want to keep my pension. So you can see the dilemma and the public policy concerns and why there are many different lobbyists on many different sides who have petitioned the legislature for changes in Chapter 1701. So I could do it Socratic. What do you think some of the public interests are? Oh, come on. I know the law professors here don't do that much Socratic method, but when you get in front of a court, especially a court of appeals, that's all you're going to get is a bunch of questions. You think they should be released?
Yeah, we'd like to open this up because this is actually not just a sort of a theoretical question. Every city in Texas has to create a body camera policy. The body camera policy must, by statute, guide the city in the release of information under the Public Information Act. Anyone who requests a video after a critical incident falls into that bin. The only guidance the statute has given us is what is a law enforcement purpose. That's where we are. Every city is supposed to make a decision about this, and you probably haven't heard a lot of discussion.
A brave soul
Yes,
has raised
please.
his hand.
I have a question about 911 call. If you call 911 and you are a suspect by definition, how can you then request the officer to do it and not to agree to the search? Because you're a suspect. And say if your house was a tent, can you say turn off the camera? Or if your house was just a campsite, can you say turn off the camera when you yourself are a suspect?
That's a good question. That's legal talk for, boy, I don't know the answer to that. But if you make a 911 call, you got to make a judgment call about, ooh, do I have contraband? Do I have something going on in my home that, if your 911 call is from home, do I have something going on that I don't want the police to know about? But you can do certain things to protect yourself from that. You can ask them and say, I'm not consenting to you videotaping. If you say, I'm not consenting to you videotaping, then your lawyers later on, I'm not a criminal defense attorney, but your lawyers later on would likely have an argument that it was not a valid search. And they, on the other hand, would argue, but when you call 911, you consented to a search. And once you consented, you can't halfway through say, oh, well, don't look under the back seat of the car. You let me search the car. You can't say, oh, don't go in the trunk. Just look in the front. And so these are areas that are going to play out on a case-by-case basis. And I'm willing to bet that there's some surprise for most of you that by calling 911, you have waived some rights. But you have. You're asking for assistance, and you have waived some rights. It's just a matter of how far does that go. Now, I personally think if you tell them turn off the video, that should be it, that
And
you have withdrawn.
I would like to
consent.
add that, again, the statute requires every jurisdiction to have a local policy. I want to read you the definition of private space. Private space means a location in which this is kind of laughable. A location in which a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy, including a person's home. So this, on its face, appears to be written expansively to include a tent. The statute requires...
If that's your home,
That's right.
even
The-
temporarily.
The statute requires the city to create guidelines for when a peace officer should activate a camera or discontinue a recording currently in process, considering the need for privacy in certain situations and at certain locations. Well, if that is not as broad as you could possibly get, it's basically an acknowledgement that we have a problem here. The legislature only has 140 days to solve the world's problems, so we're not going to solve this one. We're going to punt and send the whole thing to your local jurisdiction to figure out. So, yeah, go ahead.
So if I, as the police officer, arrive at your place of residence, whatever it is, and I think you look suspicious, your eyes are too close together, and you request that I turn the camera off.
Is that a sign of guilt? Is that
Right.
like taking the fifth?
Then what's going to happen? And I should have the right to sign you to put the camera on.
So this will be decided locally on a case-by-case basis as a result of public debate around the local policy that is supposed to be created. What is happening as a practical matter is that police departments are writing the policy that they want, and nobody is noticing or participating. In the case of Austin, there was a very active, as you might imagine, local community interest in doing this right. That the dialogue around privacy and turning the camera off inside people's homes included the participation of the family violence community, who were particularly concerned because there are instances of family violence involving police officers. And so they brought forward the particular case of a police officer filming or not filming, or having the right to decide to film or not film inside the home of a victim of family violence whose partner was another police officer. And so that sort of flowered into a very interesting dialogue that resulted in a policy in Austin that does give people more rights with respect to asking for that camera to be turned off than is the case in a jurisdiction like Houston, where this policy was developed with essentially no public input. Go ahead.
So I'm interested in the impact of body cameras on discretionary arrests by police officers. So I work at the student legal aid office, and we often see, people who are stopped by a police officer for using a fake ID. They only get minor possession of alcohol or some lesser thing. That's entirely at the police officer's discretion. But certainly, I imagine they might suffer administrative consequences if, the video were to come out and it's like, well, you could have pursued this person for that. Is there a way to protect police officers? Because I do think that, is probably a net, social benefit to not fully persecute people for every legal violation.
Yes, so there's two fronts on that. One is that jurisdictions can create public policy around discretionary arrest. And the more that discretionary arrest is framed in a clear policy, the less likely it is that any officer who's working within that framework is going to ever have a problem. So, for example, there's been a move across the Texas recently to start doing citation in lieu of arrest for low-level marijuana. You've probably read about this. Obviously, officers can still arrest people for marijuana, but once the city of Houston says we're not going to do that anymore, yeah, they probably aren't going to do that anymore. So there's a very robust discussion right now about creating very clear public policy around when we're going to actually arrest people for things like, minor in possession of a beer. Again, we have a lot of local work that we can do, and the more people participate, the better result we end up with for both us and for officers in many cases.
Because you don't want to see a situation where an officer, for example, a university police officer, doesn't arrest only fraternities or only particular fraternities, or conversely, always arrests fraternity or sorority members and not other non-fraternity sorority members. And you could substitute any word in for fraternity or sorority: race, appearance, eyes close together, wearing blue suede shoes. You can put anything in there. And that's what Kathy means by the more you have guidelines. You can't base your decision, officer, just on race, just on the age of the vehicle, just on affiliation, just on whether someone's from town or out of town, those kinds of things. The more detail you provide, the easier it is for the officer, and then he's covered. I followed the policy. I wasn't showing favoritism.
Right, and these guidelines are also important because, as you know, there's been a great deal of discussion around, racial profiling. So where we see this frequently is both in the case of like the downtown crowd on 6th Street and also at traffic stops. And you see data that shows that, almost universally people who are pulled over and searched for a failure to signal a lane change 1,000 feet, or failure to signal 1,000 feet before a turn. That's my favorite one because I don't think any of us signals 1,000 feet before a turn, but that's a law. Yeah, that's a law, and you can be pulled over for it, and you can even be arrested for it. And if you look at the data at that level of granularity, you really do see that almost all of that is pulling over black and brown people. Most of the white community probably didn't even know that was a law. So, in the effort to end racial profiling, we want to have those clear policies, and the clearer the policies are, and this is this body camera stuff, having access to body cameras, understanding when we have access to body cameras, and then being able to use that information to hold our police force accountable to the policies that we've created are sort of a hand-in-hand thing. Yeah.
It seems like a problem with building community trust with these policies is that there would need to sort of be a hard line. Like, the more discretion that's in the policy for releasing video, the more distrust that can be there when police departments release it. So when you're balancing the interest of like maybe legitimate law enforcement purposes of like withholding video, how do you draw those hard lines?
Right. It is possible, actually. There is guidance, and when we talked earlier about the law enforcement exception and how these decisions were made with respect to dash cam video, the law enforcement exception is, in my opinion, overly broad, but it is, in fact, focused on criminal investigation requirements. I mean, there is a sort of a narrower than you might think range of things where the video discloses 2 other suspects that we don't want to talk about right now. Like, that is a defined idea, and we have been relying on it in the Public Information Act for 30, 40, 50 years. I forget when that says, since 73. What we want is something where that is a clear case. And then, in my opinion, we have public disclosure of everything else. Because the interest of the furtherance of justice means that no particular side of the equation, not the city wanting to cover their butts or the individual police officer's interest, or the interest of some civil lawyer out in the field, right? None of these interests should trump at the end of the day. That's my view.
You had another question, yes.
Yeah, so I find it's quite interesting that we're talking about whether or not they should turn off the camera before the encounter, rather than how they use the data afterwards. So whether or not you would have a right to be able to say, I can't ask you to turn off your body camera before you enter my house, but after we've had a peaceful encounter, I can maybe ask you to delete that video. Because of course, from the police officer's perspective, anyone that's asking them to turn off their body camera, well, that can still yet develop into a violent encounter where that evidence will be very helpful. But after the event's taken place and everyone can agree that nothing happened, maybe.
Well, and that's where you having a say in, I mean, there's no such thing in Texas anymore as false light privacy. But the very fact that you were involved in an incident, most people find where there's smoke, there's fire. And, we know that an arrest doesn't mean anything. An inquiry means even less. But you have an interest in making sure that that doesn't get out. So there's two issues there. Should you have a say in whether it gets disclosed? And so if they only keep it for 90 days, you can be pretty sure that nothing's going to come of it and it's going to get deleted in the regular course of business. But you have an interest in making sure it's deleted, and you have an interest in making sure it's not disclosed. And so that's where you might want to speak up and say, I can't tell you to turn it off, but what's going to happen with this? Is it in fact going to be slated for destruction, or is the governmental body going to keep an archive forever of video that they really have no reason to keep?
To Matt's point, why would any cop agree to that? I mean, they have everything to lose by turning it off.
Absolutely. And I would think, I mean, on the one hand, you could say, well, why should government collect information about us in our private lives, in our homes, and things like that in the first place? Because once they collect it, they've got it. And so there's that balancing. But I think you're going to run into more trouble with officer discretion with turning it off than you are with, because once they have it, and whether to release it and then whether to delete it in the regular course of business are going to be questions that third parties are involved in.
Well, there's also a whole nother element here, and it's almost like two trains ran into each other at a critical moment. As we all know, evidence that has been sitting in boxes in police departments all over the state has become critical to the release of innocent people. So we, as a state, have a sorry history of having convicted many, 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 many innocent people of a range of crimes, from the most serious, where we've got DNA kits that are continuing to release people, all the way to, terrible roadside traffic practices where people were convicted of very low-grade drug crimes that they also didn't commit. And so there is a new body of law that is requiring the retention of evidence. And the purpose for that is really so that your attorney can come back later and look at it again, and you could potentially undo your conviction. And so the Michael Morton Act has been a radical change in how we think about evidence. So in this case, the video is evidence, and that has become a big debate as well.
It's sometimes evidence. So in a large number of encounters, the police are going to arrive, they're going to settle a dispute, that's going to be the end of the matter, and then life goes on for everyone involved. In the case where, they're actually going to have to bring criminal charges, then it's obvious that there's evidence, evidence should come into play. But in the event that it's a completely peaceful encounter, you can kind of
Right.
see that people might have a better argument that it's not evidence, that this is just an encounter that I had with a police officer. Why are you keeping it for a million years?
Yes.
But what if your completely peaceable encounter because you hadn't committed a crime. What if a week later you get a knock on the door from ICE saying, oh, we just happen to want to see your papers?
Well, that's sort of my point, is that it comes down to how they're actually using this recording.
Can other law enforcement agencies obtain it?
Right.
And they can.
That's right. They're using it primarily as evidence. And the statute makes that clear. Recordings as evidence. This is the guiding framework for the public release or not release, for this whole dispute about what is law enforcement purpose and whether justice includes, that framework is the thing that defines everything. And whether it should or not is another question. But right now, law enforcement has the upper hand, and we're kind of trying to work in the interstices to identify places where we can, by policy, give ourselves some rights.
I like where Matt is going.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing you say, and y'all haven't really addressed it directly, is since we're looking for policy ideas, if after you have a reported police encounter, and you feel like, as a citizen, nothing has happened of consequence, there's no reason for the police to keep it for 90 days, can we have a process where I can fill out a form that basically applies for the early deletion of that report?
I think that would be a great policy, and I actually think within the scope of the statute, it could absolutely be done. I doubt if any law enforcement agency would take that one without fighting hard in the other direction, but that is a debate that we could and should have.
Is that
And
something within the Office of the Police Monitor we have in Austin because that's the other interest, that intersects?
Yeah.
Well, what they're going to say is they need statutory authority to delete it earlier than 90 days because both the Penal Code and the Public Information Act prohibits it, makes it a crime to delete
That's true.
information that is collected,
Yes.
assembled, or
The
maintained by a
statutory
governmental body.
limit is 90 days.
So as a matter of policy, I don't think they can do it. But they could recommend an amendment to the statute that gives them that discretion when all interested parties request it, or give you the
We had
right
another question.
to ask that it be deleted.
This somewhat overlaps, and I can see how this would create a greater policy concern, but I'm really curious, because I'm not super familiar with the freedom of information process, but how accessible is this public information to a seemingly disinterested third party? Like, I'm thinking of a situation where somebody calls 911 and says, hey, my neighbor Ted Cruz is smoking marijuana naked, playing bongos in his house. Comes in, I could see a newspaper being very interested in having access to that. When they show up, there's no marijuana, but he is playing bongos naked and a camera catches that. It stays in the database for 90 days. How accessible is that information to a disinterested third party like the Texas Tribune?
I think inquiring minds want to know about that video.
I see there's a
Sure.
interest in this information, but if I'm really curious about what's happening in my neighbor's house and the cops have shown up 3 times, how much access do I have to see the body camera footage?
Yeah, under the current statute, you would have very limited ability to get that because let's see, you would know.
Well, the privacy question
Yes,
is,
it would be inside of a person's home.
well, in the backyard though. You
Oh.
said playing bongos naked in the backyard. Okay,
Oh,
is that
well,
within
yes,
view of
now
other
we-
houses? Is that really in the house? Does it involve highly intimate and embarrassing facts such that a reasonable person would object to its release, balanced with, is there a legitimate public interest in knowing about it? Okay, so we have someone who may be, who is serving in a public capacity. There is a public interest. The more significant the person, the greater the public interest. And so if I were an inquiring mind representing a member of the media, I'd ask for it and say, don't you dare destroy it, because there are also laws that say once there's a Public Information Act request for something, you cannot destroy it until that's resolved. I'd ask for it, and then they'd be coming back and going, well, what's the law enforcement purpose for withholding it? Is there a law enforcement purpose? And it would boil down to the privacy interest of the subject of the video.
And quite
that you would want to have some mechanism by which to protect your privacy for an encounter with the police that doesn't arise in any sort of criminal complaint or arrest or citation.
Right.
Or you have someone who acts with malice and calls the police on you to make you late to a law school exam or something awful like that. It's happened, trust me. It's really awful. But yeah, and you want, or what if you want to make sure that's destroyed? Or on the other hand, what if you want to make sure it's preserved to show, I want to get to the bottom of this. Somebody's called 911 on me 5 times, ex-spouse, whoever, but someone's called 911 on me, and every time I've had a peaceable encounter with the officer and it's been, oh, nothing's going on here. Please look around. What's happening? And I might want to have a copy of that too, and of the 911 tape to find out what's really going on. So I might want that information as evidence for some other investigation or some other purpose.
Well, I believe that thanks to the awesome questions, we've now gone over. And the next panel are probably waiting to do their thing.
Or they're having lunch.
Oh, is it lunch?
I
Is that what
think
we're
there's
doing?
lunch over in the big auditorium.
Lunch will be served in the train lunch we're at. I'll be leading the line, so I'll want a quick way there. So, yeah.
And we can hang out for a few minutes?
Yeah, we'll be
Yeah.
happy if
So if
you're
anybody
not
wants to
that
ask
hungry.
more questions, we'll hang out over there.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.